Broadcasting from the spooky South Coast and around the world on Midnight FM, this is Midnight Society. I am your host, Tim Weisberg. Whether it is the brightest of day or the darkest of night, wherever you may be, it's time to hunker down for the next 2 hours as we enter into a world of wonder and weird that you won't hear anywhere else. And tonight, we talk to the entity seeker. Morgan Knudsen's here. We're going to discuss the human condition and how human involvement and our emotional condition affects our reality, including the non-physical and the paranormal. Something that I definitely believe in. So I want to find out more about her thoughts on all of that, her work, her research. And I thank you all for joining us here for a new night, a new week of the program. You may have noticed on the schedule, and I mentioned this last week, it is a even shorter week than usual because Friday morning I have to do a live broadcast with WBSM and I have to be awake at 3 a.m. So I can't go to bed at 1 a.m. So I have to take the night off of the show so I can get to bed around 9, 10 o'clock and be ready to go at 3 a.m. to go do a live broadcast. I have to go pick up the station van and all the equipment, set everything up and all that, and be ready to broadcast by 6 a.m. And if you want to hear that, you can download the WBSM app if you haven't already, or you can listen at WBSM.com. I'll be co-hosting the program with Phil Paleologos in the morning on Friday, so you can check that out if you want to. And, we welcome you to call in and say hi. It's a little bit different being on in the morning, that's for sure. Also on Friday, it's going to be a big day because after that's over, I have to go back to the office and do my regular day job, but I'm going to try and squeeze in some time at some point to watch Famously Haunted Amityville. It debuts on the Tubi app on Friday, and I've been sharing little bits and pieces on social media. Today, I shared a photo of me walking out of a restaurant carrying a bag, and I asked the question, why am I so excited about this clam chowder? Well, you'll find out. Whether they address it in the documentary or not, I will let you in on it after it's been released. So that'll be on Friday. And of course, because Thursday night I don't have to do the program, I am working on putting something together with Stephanie Burke where we can kind of preview it a little bit. We haven't decided yet if we're going to do it on Facebook Live. I'm trying to get up to 1,000 TikTok followers so that we can do it live on TikTok, but it'll probably end up being on Facebook, and we'll share all the links out on Thursday night when that happens. So we will certainly keep you up to date with everything that's happening with that. Also, this Saturday night on Spooky South Coast is going to be the Bridgewater Triangle Investigation Show. That's our annual show. Right now, it looks like it's going to be a little bit rainy, so we're keeping an eye on the forecast. As long as it's not going to be total downpours during the course of the show, we'll keep it going. We leave it at the discretion of the investigators if they're comfortable going and taking part in the investigation. If it's raining too much, that's a problem. Sometimes, of course, rain gets in the way of the investigation. But most of these locations that they go to are outdoors because we try to keep it to public access locations or places where we have permission to go. So we'll keep an eye on the forecast. And if we have to make a decision to postpone that show, we will do it probably by Thursday night, just so that all the teams have enough time to be notified and all the investigators that are going and taking part. The problem is if we do decide to push it back, there'll be no Spooky South Coast for the next couple of weeks because I've got the Weary Spirits of the Wayside Inn coming up on October 23rd, which is why there'll be no show on the 22nd or the 23rd. And then also I'm going to see the Monkees on the 30th. So it's the Mickey and Mike farewell tour. And I got a ticket because nobody else wanted to go. So I'm going to be going to see the Monkees on October 30th. I think most of you know by now because we've had Jody Ritson on talking about the Monkees. I'm a lifelong fan, so I couldn't miss that one final appearance in this area. I guess they're going to do a couple other one-off things. They're going to be performing on a Beach Boys cruise and all of that, but this is kind of the last time they'll be coming to my area. So, and I've never seen Mike Nesmith live, so I couldn't pass up that chance. So that'll be on the 30th. And then next month, things get all kinds of crazy, too, with some different conventions going on. So it's going to be a hectic schedule. So just stay tuned to here and to social media, and we'll keep you abreast of the entire situation. All right, enough of that. Let's get into tonight's program. Co-founding and leading Entity Seeker Paranormal Research and Teachings in 2003, Morgan Knudsen's experiences and knowledge have led to researching and co-creating a unique investigative program called Teaching the Living, and subsequently she has been featured on and hosted numerous specials and TV shows such as Haunted Hospitals and Paranormal 911. She can also be found on her podcast, Supernatural Circumstances, with true crime expert Mike Brown, which launches on October 25th on Chorus Podcasts, and she joins us now. Good evening, Morgan. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing very well. And well, first of all, let's start off with let's talk about the new podcast that's coming out. I mean, October 25th is a great time to launch a podcast called Supernatural Circumstances.
We thought so too, and we're so excited about this one because our goal with it was not only to bring people interesting cases and interesting theories and philosophies and things like that, but we really wanted to get people thinking critically about these cases and also starting to learn that what goes on in the paranormal world is so applicable to everyday life, and there's lessons in these cases, in these circumstances, and there's magic in this world. And I think both Mike and I, we really feel strongly about that, and we want everybody to walk away from every episode feeling like not only that they've experienced something unique, but that they're taking something away from what they're listening to that they can take into their everyday. So we're stoked about it. I think it's going to be a great time.
I mean, we are, we're getting to the point, and it's been a long process. So let me just start off by saying that. But if you look at this new focus on the paranormal that's been going on for the last, we'll call it 20 years, we have seen a shift start to move from it being something that was a taboo topic to things that people are more open to talking about, to, it gets a different type of coverage now in mainstream media than it used to get. I mean, it is becoming part of normal conversation, but it's still so far away from being part of accepted reality.
Yeah, and it depends on where you fall in your everyday life as to how accepted it is. Like when I'm working on, say, for example, if we're getting stories or whatnot for a show like Haunted Hospitals, it's really, really difficult to have people come forward because their job is often on the line, or they feel that their job is on the line. They don't want to be labeled as mentally ill or crazy or something that could compromise that experience for them, or military, for example. There's another area. But it's becoming a little bit more of a household word, which is really, really nice. Part of that is thanks to people like Dan Aykroyd, who started Ghostbusters for that very reason. But I think it's becoming a more accepted phenomenon. People are coming out to talk about it a lot more. But I think when it comes to really personal experiences, we still have a ways to go, especially in the medical community.
There's also people that are, becoming so prominently known for this that have day jobs that could be affected. I think that's a helpful thing to have, just for an example, you mentioned Haunted Hospitals and dealing with the medical industry. You have a guy like Richard Estep, who is an EMT, but also researches the paranormal. And, there's plenty of folks that I've spoken to over the years that are maybe emergency room technicians, or, these people that are seeing this stuff on a daily basis that do lend some credibility to it. It's just that it's almost like the people that don't want to hear it and don't want to accept it are always going to maintain that mindset, no matter what type of person comes forward and says, yes, I've had these experiences and they're real.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head with that. Like Richard and I, we filmed together on both Haunted Hospitals and Paranormal 911, and we've had a lot of long conversations about that because it's interesting. Like there's people that will have these jobs and they can work it, and it adds this amazing aspect of credibility. And I mean, many of my colleagues are university professors and in the medical field in neuroscience and things like that. And they're ultimately the ones that I think are going to, if these militant skeptical individuals are going to shift their position, then I think it's going to come from that side of the fence. But you're right. Like, I mean, there are people out there who it literally doesn't matter what's put in front of them, they ultimately deny the evidence that's presented. So, I mean, those people you can't really be bothered with in this field. At this point, we have to move forward with the evidence that we have, and the people that are open-minded enough to pursue it.
So when you start to, get involved with the podcast, when you start putting it all together, like, what's the plan? Are you going to be speaking to these people? Are you going to be talking about circumstances? How are you going to approach this in a new way?
Well, mainly what we're aiming to do is we're presenting cases, first of all, that aren't necessarily covered often. Though for the debut episode actually is a really great example of that. We're talking about a case from Ontario, Canada, that was it was an experiment that was put together by the Society of Psychical Research out of Toronto and Mensa. And what they did was that they wanted to create an entity or consciousness out of pure focus. Nothing to do with conjuring a disincarnate entity, but actually creating an entity out of focus and attention and just basically creating a thinking being from focus. And they created this character called Philip. And what was interesting was they wrote the backstory for Philip. They did all of that. And then they worked every day. They met and used these old Victorian seance methodologies to conjure something called Philip. And they got to the point where they were like, okay, we have to believe that Philip exists in order for this to actually happen. And lo and behold, they found out that, yeah, it actually worked. And then they did a repeat of that experiment with another group called Lilith. And they were able to create the same result all over again. So we're using situations like that and getting people to understand, say, for example, in this debut episode, that what we experience and what we focus on, what we put our attention on, really does take a life of its own. And so we want people to begin to take these cases apart and look at them in a brand new way. Because for me, the Philip experiment was so groundbreaking that it really changes how you start to look at the paranormal in general. And I think so. Cases like that are going to be really important to us. We've got some amazing guests that are going to be coming up, where we're going to really delve into the psychology behind what's going on, why some of these things seem to be happening, where we are on the leading edge of neuroscience and quantum physics in terms of how the paranormal is now being reshaped by these different universities. So we're hoping that we're really going to be on the leading edge of creating something interesting for people.
Now, I've been a big fan of, looking deeper into the Philip experiment for a long time. I love the idea that we could be creating some of these hauntings ourselves. I know other people get upset about that, but I'm not trying to say that, there aren't quote unquote ghosts the way that we would traditionally describe them. But I also think that it's possible that we are creating these things ourselves. And if that's the case, if they're a collective thought form, that's far more intriguing to me. And the other thing that makes me really think that it's a possibility is human beings are not exactly, the most dependable creatures to, do the same things over and over again. But if you go to a place and you're expecting to have something happen and that something happens, I would think that's less likely a human being deciding to, well, I guess I better go bang on that same door again, as opposed to it being the idea that everybody in the room is expecting to hear a knock on that door, therefore a knock emerges.
Yeah, exactly. And what's fascinating to me, because like you, this case just, I think, sets such a precedent for how to look at this stuff. And in the current advancements in parapsychological research, 10th edition that just was released this year, there was a chapter that really solidified a lot of this stuff by a fellow by the name of Dr. William Roll, and he's since passed over, but his work was really brought again to the surface because back in the early 2000s and even prior to that, he was really delving into exactly this again and using, because the Philip experiment for our audience members that was done in the 1970s, and Dr. William Roll really brought this idea around again with what our current understanding is in terms of probabilities and emotional focus and quantum physics and things like that. And now it's becoming a far more provable thing than it ever had been back when the Philip experiment was kicking around. So I think I think it has to be acknowledged that we, like you, I mean, I definitely believe there are consciousnesses out there that you can interact with that aren't us. But I think these thought forms, come from this ability of the universe to have this fundamental consciousness, and it's a big deal.
And the downside of it is, if we don't accept that as a reality and start tailoring our investigation toward it, and it doesn't mean that it has to be an either or situation. You can still look into the idea of disembodied souls, but if you don't follow that path a little bit, you're just going to be I'm picturing in my head a dog chasing its tail. That's all that it's going to be.
Yeah, you fall behind the times, I think, if you're not bringing this knowledge into the forefront, because I've had plenty of experiences where I can say, you know what, this is not something I've created. This is something that I think is in the space, or is somebody that maybe I knew at one point or something like that. But the idea that when we are focused in such a way, whether it be in a really positive, joyful way or a super negative way, and that relationship that we have between ourselves and this fundamental consciousness that seems to be that we're immersed in every day, we've got so much potential, I think, to move forward in a fantastic new way, understanding not only non-physical, but understanding ourselves, and a further reach of what our minds and what our brains and what our thought is capable of.
Yeah, I mean, you get the people that ask, well, if ghosts are real, why is it that in, thousands of years of looking into ghosts, we haven't had any proof of what they are? Well, because for thousands of years, we thought they were disembodied souls, and we've only just in the past, maybe 70, 80, 100 years started to think that there are other possibilities to what it could be.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, too, our understanding of our own relationship in regards to these circumstances has changed, too, because here, in the past and even into present day, I think it's always been something that people have felt was asserted on them, rather than something that we were connected with, or we had a say with, or we could interact with on a level that we really didn't understand. We thought that this was something that you needed a medium to connect with, or this was something, if it was a negative situation, that this was just happened to me and I'm a purely the victim and that's it. When in reality we are really intertwined with this stuff, and I think it's going to really change how we deal with this.
But if we do start making those changes, I think that it would be a pretty rapid ascension of information. I think if we just started kind of shifting the way we looked at things, we would figure things out relatively quickly.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, with William Earle's research specifically, I think things can really move forward at a greater pace once this is a little bit more relevant for the everyday person. I think we've got a culture right now that's very immersed in the idea of sort of the ghost hunting, like television type shows and the methodologies and things like that. And so I think it's going to take a little bit for people to grab onto this information. It's also a lot to get people, I think, to realize that we do have a say in it. I think in a little bit it seems a bit sci-fi for some people still, but in reality, this is the stuff that's going on in labs like Princeton's Paralab and places like Oxford and universities like that.
I mean, if you think about it, we haven't really mastered outer space yet, but we have a much better understanding of it. We have a much better understanding of the deepest depths of the ocean. What lies beyond is the other greatest mystery that we could try to explore. So I don't know why the same effort isn't put into that as it is into the other two, even if it turns out that, none of this is legitimate. If that was the final, the final diagnosis, the final decision out of everything that has been researched, we say, okay, people have been mistaken for thousands of years. It was all just a big misunderstanding. It's still a question worth answering.
Absolutely. And, I think part of the reason why this subject gets so hairy for so many people is because it requires a paradigm shift if they're not up to speed with this way of thinking or this this information. Where with something like space, it's something that's very external that we can step out and explore. But I think people don't have as many paradigms about space as they do about how the brain works, or about whether we're just meat suits, or like there's a lot of connective tissue around those. And I think when we turn around and say, okay, look, this is a brand new way of thinking about what life after death and yourself, and this is all intermingled. I think sometimes we're asking some people to, like you were saying, they're still trying to understand their environment, their physical environment, and now we're asking them to understand something they completely can't see. And I think some people have struggled with that, if that makes sense.
No, it does. And as we move forward, in the discussion, we'll get into some of the deeper reasons why they could be exploring it in a different way. But, you've kind of touched upon it a little bit, that it just takes a matter of, being able to say what we're doing now isn't necessarily working. It doesn't mean it's wrong, but we just have to find a different way to come to some of these conclusions.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's it, is that we've got to start including more factors into what's being presented. The old models are falling behind in a lot of ways. And, it's not just as simple as it was even 20 years ago. We didn't have a lot of the understanding that we do now. There's some fantastic work going on in even the University of Toronto here in Canada, about Alzheimer's and ESP and brain injury. And the work that's being done is absolutely phenomenal. And they're realizing just, how the brain is starting to filter these experiences. And, if you've got brain damage, they're realizing that damaging certain areas of the brain is actually conducive to experiencing more ESP. All sorts of just incredible pieces of information that nobody wants to sit down and read a pile of white papers, so it's not really getting out there very well.
Yeah, can you put it into a documentary on Netflix or, like that?
Exactly.
But it's starting. We're starting to see that shift. So speaking of shift, we have to shift into our first break of the night. When we come back on the other side, we'll start getting into, well, first of all, we'll find out how Morgan got involved in a lot of this stuff to start with, but then we'll start getting into some of these emotional connections to hauntings. And it's something that you've heard me mention many times here, that I think that it's not something that can be measured by physics because it is emotional. So we'll get into all of that and more. If you want to find out more about Morgan during the break, if you want to be able to pick up her book or visit her websites or follow her on social media, all you have to do is go to midnight.fm. You'll see her face right there under the Midnight Society section right at the top of the page. Click on that. That will bring you over to the page for tonight's show. We put all of our guests right there for you with all of the relevant links so that you can always be able to catch everything, because sometimes in the course of a conversation, book titles, websites, they all fly right by. Sometimes spellings are difficult, whatever it might be. So that's why we have it all right there for you, nice and easy. And that's where you can always find out who the guest is going to be on the next program. So we try to give you the current day's program, the day before, and the day coming up so that you'll be able to follow along with the lineup. Speaking of the lineup, of course, we always put it out every week on our social media, which you can follow us at MidnightDOTFM, and you can interact with us there. If you want to send in questions during the program, use email tim@midnight.fm. And if you want to interact with other listeners during the program, we have the Midnight Society with Tim Weisberg Facebook group. We have Twitter, #MidnightFM, and we have the Discord server if you're a member of Midnight FM. Back with more Midnight Society in just a moment on Midnight FM. Hey, funny how that works.
You're listening to Midnight Society with Tim Weisberg on Midnight FM.
And welcome back into Midnight Society here on Midnight FM. Tonight we were talking with Morgan Knudsen, the entity seeker. We're talking with her about her research into the paranormal. By the way, I just want to thank everybody for their understanding over the weekend. I had to cancel Spooky South Coast this past week because at the end of the program Friday night, I was starting to come down with something during the show. And me being me, I was convinced, it's nothing. I turned the heat on for the first time. It's all the dust from the heat coming off. And that might have played a part in it. But then by the time the show was over, I had a fever of about 100.9. And I was, I had the chills and all that. So I just, finished the work, crawled into bed. And I spent all day Saturday in bed recovering. Woke up Sunday morning, no fever. Everything was fine. So no idea what happened, what was going on. I know it wasn't COVID because I had no other symptoms and it went away very quickly, and I'm vaccinated. So I would hope that it, would take a lot to get a breakthrough case. But if I if I had kept going with the symptoms into a second day, I certainly would have gone and taken a test. But I just felt like, it was literally just the fever, and I had some swelling in my jaw area and some pain in my gums. So I just think maybe it was some kind of weird infection or something, but I'm all better now. And, if I wasn't all better, I wouldn't be able to talk to you. So, but it was nice to just spend an entire day in bed. Either way, haven't done that in forever since the last time I was sick. A little odd fact about me that you might not know. I don't get sick very often. Usually when I do, I get walloped with it, but then it only lasts a day and then it goes away. I don't know, some weird thing about my constitution, my immune system, whatever it might be. They should bottle it up and give it to other people that need that kind of stuff. But it's not like I treat my body well either. So I want to thank it for all of its hard work, keeping me healthy despite all of my best efforts to undermine it. All right, let's get right back into the discussion here with Morgan, as we've been talking about her different approach to looking into this. And I think, the right approach based on the things that I've learned over the years. But let's start off with first of all, how you started looking into the paranormal to begin with. And then we can talk about where the shift came to be, where you saw it as being something different than the way other people saw it.
Sure. Yeah. It's funny that the story was kind of surprising, actually, is how I ended up getting involved with it, because I had an experience when I was a kid, I think as most people do, when I was about 9 years old. And the experience at the time was really, really frightening. But within about 48 hours of the experience, I thought, this is really incredible. And I grew up in the era where the paranormal researchers who were on TV and were speaking out were people like Lloyd Auerbach and Carrie Gaynor, and really just reputable, solid individuals. And I started to really look into it even at that young age, because it just fascinated me. And as I grew up, that I never lost that interest or that passion. So by the time I ended up into junior high and high school, I met what was to be basically a sister to me, Stephanie Wirtz. And she and I basically spent our entire young lives immersed in reading, studying. And we gave up, all this, everybody else was out of the bars and school dances. We were up late at night trying to understand this stuff. And this is basically what we spent our lives doing. And it wasn't until about 6 years into forming Entity Seeker and our program Teaching the Living that I discovered that my great-great-grandfather actually founded the first paranormal association in Canada. And I had no idea. And what was really fascinating to me was that when I finally acquired the 2 books that he published on the subject, I found out that his approach was extremely similar to mine. And it kind of blew my mind. But I knew right then that this was definitely no accident, let me tell you.
Yeah, there seems to be things that draw people into this, usually be those paranormal, personal experiences, I should say, or they come from a family where it is something that is discussed and talked about. You mentioned Dan Aykroyd earlier. His interest in this came about because his family were researchers of it. So, that's a background that I think starts you off on the right foot to not be coming from the sensibility of, oh, this stuff isn't real, and now I have to deal with this entire, paradigm shift in my worldview. I can come at this from a different perspective and start looking into it in a more serious manner.
Totally, and that support system is so massive. What's funny was that when I was a little kid, my grandmother, she had terrible experiences with the paranormal when she was younger, and she had told my mom and dad, whatever you do, don't let her get involved. Don't let her get involved in this stuff, which of course failed miserably. But it was one of those things that even my mom and dad were like, I don't think we should openly push it. And they didn't. It was just sort of happenstance that we ended up in this haunted place when we were living in Vancouver, and we lived in actually two really haunted houses when we were there, and it was kind of unavoidable because there's so many weird things happening in these houses. It just became really unavoidable, and I was just fascinated. I thought, this is the most amazing thing. I mean, here we are, we're taught all our lives this can't happen, and it's happening. We're watching this magic happen around us, and it's amazing. So no, I was hooked.
And I feel bad for people that, do have to come from the background of not thinking that it's real. I mean, my parents told me that too when I was very young, but I was fortunate enough that by the time I was like 6, 7, 8 years old, I overheard my mother talking with her sisters and my grandmother about the ghost in the attic at the house. So I was like, wait a minute, the grown-ups are talking about the ghosts? I thought ghosts weren't real. So, but, the people who start from behind the 8 ball with it, I feel bad that they do, but then I also love that moment of discovery for them when you can take them out on their, first paranormal experience and watch it happen to them in real time and see how it affects and changes them. Oh yeah.
And it is such a magical thing, because the experience of going from, I can see, touch, taste everything in my world, and that's the end of that, is so limiting. And I think one of the things I love so much about the paranormal and this side of things is that it opens up your horizons in every aspect of your life. And I think that's the one thing that the paranormal really has the potential of doing for people, which is something that I'm really passionate about, is that, it has the potential of opening people's minds to not only what's out there and what we don't understand, and that the unknown can be a wonderful thing, but also what they are capable of. There's so much internal potential that every individual has that is so untapped. And we're taught that, oh, that doesn't exist. Your dreams aren't real. This is, quench your intuition. Don't be stupid. Don't be ridiculous. That's not true. And it just kills dreams at the end of the day. And the paranormal opens up a whole nother world of potential for people, and just, yeah, it's amazing to me.
Sorry, I turned down my mic to cough and forgot to put it back up. Do you find, though, that when you are seeing people change and have this change in it, I'd like to think that certainly it opens their mind up to the existence of the paranormal, but it should also change their mind in how they look at a lot of things. The same process that we put into looking into this can be applied to other mysteries of life, and it's the same kind of open-ended critical thinking that I think we need more of in our lives. But the problem is people just become so determined to figure out an outcome already that they're not going through the natural process of the investigation. And I mean that the investigation just to answer the question, not the actual, physical paranormal investigation.
No, I completely agree. And, I think you hit the nail on the head too, of the determination of the outcome before anything's enacted. And one of the things that they're really starting to hammer home in parapsychology right now is that these probabilities that are put out in front of us are endless. There's infinite probabilities, and our focus and our state of expectation, like you were mentioning at the beginning here, is so crucial, because our state of expectation will start to determine the outcomes that we're getting and the probabilities that we have access to. So as we're moving through our day-to-day world, our thoughts, our thinking, our action, everything that we're doing, and how our belief systems are set and what we're telling ourselves is influencing the things that are going to be happening around us. So when we look even at it into the paranormal field, for instance, and we look at people who are brought in for remote viewing experiments or Gansfeld experiments or things like that, the people who are more open-minded, the people who have a less solid state of expectation that, oh, no, this isn't going to happen, this isn't real, I don't believe in this stuff. The people who are more open-minded and the people who are willing to just be soft about it have better responses and better overall reviews than the people who come in that are negative-minded. And so it's no wonder that we see this group of people who are kind of moving through life and they're just going, oh, that's not going to work out, and this isn't going to work out, and I don't believe in that, and they're having this very limited experience. Where, if you're a bit more open-minded and you take things a little bit lighter, then, these probabilities begin to open up and things start to happen.
There's also, as you go through this in your own mind and as you go through your own experiences, you would think that you would need to, have a lot of experiences for it to start to work itself out in your mind. And I found that that's not the case. I found that, you don't have to be very hands-on to start to peel back the layers and figure things out. If you just have that one experience, it changes enough of the way that you look at things that all of a sudden, you can start to dive into it with a whole different perspective.
Absolutely. And, for the people even that haven't had that one experience yet, they can get to that new level of open-mindedness and awareness as long as they can find and work with themselves to find that feeling place of, hey, what would it be like if? Wouldn't it be nice if? Well, what if this happened? That essence of curiosity is so important. And, that in and of itself starts to open the doors for, things to start to pop into your experience. And all of a sudden, that new thing happens and you can go, hey, wait a minute. This wouldn't have been in my experience 3 months ago. What's going on? And you start to see that shift in what's going on around you. I think it's just really cool.
Also, let's talk about then how you start to put that into practice and then get out there and look into all of this and, become, entity seeker. How does that transition go from, having experiences to now being out there and actively looking into it?
For me, it was not only having the experiences and going and trying to experience as much of this as we could, because Steph and I we really wanted to explore as many options as we possibly could. And we went out, we met people, we talked to people, we got together with people that were also like-minded and interested in just having these kinds of discussions. And we ended up being called to some of our first cases. We were some of the original investigators really in the city of Edmonton, Alberta. And at the time, this wasn't really something that was talked about. This is about 20 years ago. And people were really interested in having us in. And the more that we had these interactions with people, the more we began to realize the correlation between what they were experiencing and how they were thinking and how they were just generally being in the world. What attitude, what emotions were they generally carrying into their day? And we began to see this correlation that was just, we couldn't unsee it once we saw it. And we thought, there's something to this, that the people who are resonating at different points emotionally are really getting back the essence of what they're putting out there. And when we began to be more sure about what we were observing, we began to put these into practice with a few different people, and we started to see changes almost immediately. So from there, we really wanted to start teaching and getting into workshops and at least sharing the knowledge that we had. We definitely didn't think we were experts in the field at that point by any means, but we did want to share the information that we had. And the more we started to study this, the more we realized that the correlation this wasn't coincidence. This was something that was happening.
Well, and that's the interesting part about your work too, is that so many groups start getting into this and they start researching, investigating, they fall into a certain mindset and a technique and a way of doing things, and they're not always necessarily looking for new ways of doing it, finding new methodologies or new pathways to follow. They might look for the latest flashy gadget, but they're just going to still use that same flashy gadget in the same style of investigation. So, but it sounds like with your group, you've always tried to say, let's just go with what the latest possibility is of a way that could find us an answer, not abandoning what you've been doing before, but always willing to try new things.
Yeah, well, and this field is constantly expanding. I mean, the universe is a constant state of expansion, no matter what job you're in. But I think this one specifically, it's forever expanding. And what we began to notice, and I think what really made us turn a different direction, was the fact that over and over and over again, we were seeing the same phenomenon, the same responses from the people, and it seemed to us like it was the only area of work where people seemed to have no sense of connectedness or responsibility in what was going on. And, in no other area of life is that the case. That, no matter how flat you make a pancake, there's always two sides. And we thought, this doesn't seem to make any sense, that we are just so far removed from something that is consciousness. And I mean, we are consciousness, so that that didn't add up to us. So when we started to engage people, we began to realize this really isn't about the entity at all that's in the house, or whatever it is. The answer to that doesn't really matter. And what really matters is the people and their response, and how they're engaging what's going on in the house, and how they're responding to it. Because I mean, you can argue as to what these entities are until you're blue in the face, but at the end of the day, the person, what you're dealing with is the people, and those are the things you can control. So we were like, okay, how do we get people to respond in a new way, do something different, feel something different, engage their life differently, so that they get a different response? And as soon as we realized that was key, all of a sudden, this stuff started to clear up for them. So we just pursued it, and it's, and now it's, I've taught this in psychology programs, social work programs, all over the place.
Well, that's really interesting that there's, people that are willing to go down this road involved in other scientific pursuits. And that's where we've had a big disconnect, where sometimes we can't get the quote unquote mainstream science to accept this. And I think that's because people have been trying too hard to get the mainstream physical sciences to look into this, when it's probably more of a social science.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've taught both in the social work programs, Aboriginal social work programs, psychology programs, and ultimately it really does come back to the people, because especially in the Aboriginal social work programs that I've taught in, I did that for probably 10 years. What was so fascinating about those classes is that they were made up of every possible culture and religion you can imagine. So everything from people that had just come here from Haiti, people who had come here from Europe. We had people come that of course were indigenous, like Cree, Métis, all of these different individuals, and everybody had a different take on what the phenomenon was. Of course, I mean, everybody's got a different cultural bias and basis for what they're seeing, but it all comes back to one thing, and it all comes back to the person. And when you realize it comes back to the person, you stop fighting over what it is that you're looking at phenomenon wise, because everybody's got a different perception, and you'll never get through a debate like that. But it all comes back to, okay, but what's going on in this person's experience that they're getting this reflected back at them, using this paranormal phenomenon as a mirror of what is going on with the person. And then you start dealing with the person. It completely changes how things are how things are done with them.
And so my basic approach when I have talked about this to people is I've tried to explain it as that a ghost isn't a physical being. It's an emotion. It's a feeling in the moment. And the same way you can't measure love or hate or anger. There's no device you can pull out that will measure those particular things, but you can measure the changes in the environment. And I can't understand why people don't understand the similarity of this. If you put two people in a room and have them argue, it changes the environmental factors of the room. You will get, first of all, that tension that you'll feel even if nobody's saying anything, but also you can measure the fact that the temperature of the room goes up, that the electromagnetic field in the room will go up. And the same thing happens when a ghost is present, but yet people scoff at the idea of them being one and the same.
Yeah, I completely agree. And what's interesting, and I think what people typically don't realize, is that we're taught to believe that our emotions are in our heads, we're taught to believe that, how you feel, that's kind of your problem. But at the end of the day, we really do project energy, and energy is such a blanket term, but one of the areas we get to see this so demonstrated so blatantly is in the world of psychokinesis, where you see energy that is become stored in an object, and now they're realizing that energy can actually be stored for days on end in an object and then have it blow up 48 hours later. But you've got all of this energy that is literally being projected that is powerful. Our emotions are powerful, and it's not just something that's in your head or something that's it's going to dissipate after you're done being angry or you're done being happy. That's in the environment. And it's an electrical signal. An emotion is measurable, and I think people don't realize that those things are something that does affect the environment around us, just like you were saying. This is something that is not only changing the makeup of our environment on an atomic level, but it's something that's changing our environment based on the probabilities that we'll get because we're in a certain emotional state.
So I have this line that I throw out that people argue with me about, but it's something that I feel is true, that this activity exists for the purpose of being observed, that you don't have paranormal activity in a vacuum, that the fact that somebody is going to observe it is what makes it happen. And when people say, oh, how do you explain when something happens, in an empty room and it gets caught on the surveillance camera? Well, because there's a surveillance camera. The idea that it's being observed in some fashion, that somebody will eventually see it, is why it happens. And I think that the human side of it is an important part in the experience happening. It's kind of the primary battery source for any of it to take place.
Well, yeah, and what you're describing is essentially the observer effect, and our observation is what creates something and puts it into physical reality. I wrote an article recently for Haunted Magazine about this. And the example that I was using for people was the idea of flipping two coins. And if you've got two coins and each one is we'll pretend that you've got two particles, but each one is a coin. And you flip both of them, and the only one that you can only observe one at a time, and that one lands on heads. The other one is spinning. The other one is still spinning because your observation, your attention's not on it. And in quantum physics, it's called spinning in superposition. And that's always a probability. It's almost like Schrodinger's cat. Like, it's just, you don't know whether it's alive or dead until you open the box. And it will be either one until it's observed. And our reality is like this, where you've got, that one thing that you're observing all the time, but that other thing, that other half of that particle that's out there, that thing is just spinning and spinning and spinning and spinning. Your expectation, your state of expectation, how you decide that that's going to land is really ultimately how that thing's going to land. And with the paranormal, it's just exactly the same thing. We're our emotional state, what we're telling ourselves about it, all of this. Until we turn our attention to it, those probabilities are endless. And it comes back to the question, how do you want this to go? What are you telling yourself? How do you want this to go? You get to choose.
Right. Just flip a coin 100 times and, put your intention in what it's going to be and see, how often it turns out to be more of what you thought it was going to be, as opposed to being a 50-50 shot. So, I mean, it's not scientific in any way, but at least it gives you some idea of the way that it goes. All right. Well, we're going to take our next break here. When we come back on the other side, we'll dive deeper into this. We'll also take any questions you might have, tim@midnight.fm. And again, if you want to send in a question, please send in a direct question. Don't get too fancy and put a bunch of paragraphs and all that stuff, because I will just say, I got to hang on to that because I can't read that whole thing while we're on the air. But if you do have a question, put it in very directly, and I will make sure that we answer it before the program is over. Also, during the break, head on over to our friends over at Voice. You've heard me talking about the special sale they have going on. I found out today it's a holiday sale. Got an email from Voice. They said that $149 price right now, that's our holiday sale. And The promo code still applies. You can still get 10% off your order. You're going to get that radio for under $130 with free shipping and a 30-day money-back guarantee, but you're not going to need it. It's the best-sounding Wi-Fi streaming radio out there. Check it out at voiz.link, voiz.link. Use that promo code MIDNIGHT and save that 10%. You know, I'm trying to think of how many people on my Christmas list could use one of those. I bet you there's some on yours as well. Take advantage now when they're basically 50% off the regular price. Voiz.link, voiz.link, promo code MIDNIGHT. Back with more Midnight Society in just a moment on Midnight FM.
You're listening to Midnight Society with Tim Weisberg on Midnight FM.
And welcome back to Midnight Society here on Midnight FM. Tonight we're talking with Morgan Knudsen about her life as the entity seeker, her work in the paranormal. We mentioned she also has a new podcast coming up called Supernatural Circumstances that'll be premiering on October 25th on Chorus Podcast. You can find out more about that by going to midnight.fm. You'll find all the relevant links there, including one of those links is over to the Supernatural Circumstances Facebook page. So go over there and give that a follow now so that you can start getting ready for when it debuts. But we're talking about some of the work that Morgan has done in the paranormal world and understanding these connections between emotions and hauntings. And we've been talking about that, for the last segment, we were discussing it kind of at the level of where people need to understand why they're connected and why this seems to be the way that the research should go. But let's talk about, in the actual midst of an investigation, if we do feel that it's an emotional circumstance, how does that set the tone and the methodology for how you investigate it?
Well, basically what we're looking at is how the people are being within the environment and within themselves. So for me, I'm interested not only in the phenomenon that's going on in the environment, in the house and what's happening, but you can begin to see the environment and the type of activity that's going on as a reflection of what needs to be addressed with the people. So for me, if I go into a house and you've got chaos, you've got like crazy stuff going on, the activity is excessively violent, or it's targeted towards one person, or anything like that, any sort of circumstances, then you can begin to look at that almost like a mirror that's being reflected back at you, and you can start to see where things need to change. Case in point, I had a case about 2 years ago, I guess now, of a young family, and the mother was being targeted quite harshly by some intelligence, and it was extremely aggressive towards her, had almost no use at all for her husband, although every once in a while he would see it crop up. It would, stuff would happen, but it was mainly targeting her. And long story short, when we finally got into it with her and finally got her to admit some of the things that had been going on, it was about a year, maybe 2 years prior, that she had actually left an extremely violent and abusive relationship. And she literally went from that abusive relationship into this new relationship, which was awesome, but there was nothing that was done about what had gone on with that past relationship. So here she is carrying this wound, which was essentially bleeding, right? This metaphorical wound, this psychological wound that's bleeding everywhere. And that starts to manifest in the environment. And then all of a sudden, literally the guy that replaced her, this abuser, was this other intelligence that was still abusing her. And we see it in daily life where, you'll have one person go from one bad relationship to another, because they're not cleaning up what's gone on in the past one. And sometimes what will happen is that it'll just manifest as something else. With her, it didn't manifest as another bad boyfriend because her husband was great, but it manifested in this sort of paranormal experience that she was having. So the goal with her was like, you got to clean this up. Like you got to do the hard work and clean it up. So it wasn't until she got going back into therapy and getting that sorted out, that stuff in the house started to settle down. So once she was getting off of that emotional frequency, then it was like tuning a radio dial. She just started tuning out of it, and then something else started to take its place that was a lot more positive. So for me, it's less about, okay, let's go fight the thing we can't see, and more about, okay, what is this thing that we cannot see? What is it telling us about ourselves? What is the universe showing us?
Do you find, though, that in that situation, okay, let's kind of look at the way people are tied into this activity. That, as I mentioned before, they have to be the power source for it too, but in a lot of cases they're also the conduit to it as well. That there would be no way for the activity to exist if not for the person manifesting it in that way, like you were just describing. Like they need to be the source material, but they also need to be the subject material as well.
Yes and no. I mean, I've found it as well where people are going out or get into these places or get into these situations where that energy or that manifestation had been there prior, but because that person is hanging out in that same essentially frequency as the entity is there, they'll pick up on it. And I think that's one of the reasons why you'll see families moving from place to place to place to place, and like one family will move into a house and have nothing happen, and then you'll have another family move in and it's chaos. And then the next family, they might experience it too, but then you'll have family number 4 come in and they experience nothing. And I think a lot of the time what's happening, and what seems to be happening, is that people that are within that same emotional range pick up on whatever seems to be existing within that emotional spectrum. And so I don't think it's necessarily always that they are the exact cause of it, but they sure are tuning themselves in to pick up on whatever's going on. It's kind of like somebody walking into a dysfunctional office, and those people that are just they'll be like a miserable person, or they'll be super depressed, and they will find every other depressive person in the office, and suddenly they're all hanging out, and you're going, how did you even find each other? What is this? And it seems to be functioning like that in some cases as well.
Yeah, and I want to see more. And again, it's somebody who just recently, I think, looking back on it, had an experience where I was the conduit for the activity, or at least being physically changed by it. I had thoughts that were not my own enter into my head, and it was not something I was prepared for. It was not something that I even necessarily thought was a real experience. I always thought that people who were having that happen probably had some sort of mediumship that they weren't aware of, kind of thing. And I'm certainly not that. But having had that kind of, the activity have that kind of influence over me, it started me thinking, well, how much of what we go through could be far more intense? How much of it could be far more that the activity or the paranormal side of it could be affecting us, and it's nice enough not to?
Yeah, well, and I think that brings up a really good point. We're talking about the negative side of it and stuff like that, but the majority of people's experiences statistically are really, really positive. And the media likes to spin it and be like, oh no, this is all terrifying. But in reality, statistically, even in studies by Northampton University and places like that, predominantly the experiences change people's lives for the better. And, you know, the people that are hanging out in the more positive end of the emotional spectrum really do have the most incredible experiences imaginable, and life-changing stuff that makes you realize, you know, like, we're not alone. We can manifest this amazing stuff that's just super cool. And so I think there's that end of the stick as well.
Yeah, and I mean, I almost wonder if we wouldn't be more open to the idea of putting ourselves out there as being tools in the investigation if we had a better understanding of what happens as a result of it. I think there's still some of that fear that brings itself over into investigations where people expect, oh, well, if I let a ghost, you know, come through me, say, so to speak, to be able to communicate with us, well, then that means it's going to attach itself to me and go home with me and make my life a living hell.
Yeah, and I think that stigma is driven quite a bit by the media and stuff like that, and of course movies, and, like, you know, every time we hear about the idea of possession, it's this horrifying thing, and then The Exorcist pops into our head, and, you know, we have this crazy story that we tell ourselves about what that looks like. But, you know, in reality, the possession trance disorder itself was introduced into the DSM-5 about 5 years ago or so, in the 5th edition. And what was interesting about that was the fellow who introduced it was a doctor by the name of Dr. Etzel Cardenia, who does a humongous amount of work for the parapsychology community. And in order to be diagnosed with possession trance disorder, it has to be affecting your life negatively. And if you're getting messages that are wonderful and peaceful and joyful and seem like they're really intelligent and they're enhancing your experience and whichever, they don't consider that a disorder. And I've always found that very, very interesting, because here everybody's sort of taught that, oh, you know, that person's psychotic, or, you know, the schizophrenic or delusional or whatever. But here you've got this very specific diagnosis where they're saying, no. Like, if this is something that's really positive, then it's something to be documented. It's not something to be shunned.
Well, but you know, just to go back what you said a moment ago about, you know, it being the perception that we have based on the media, there is, though, and I think this is going to be something independent of what, you know, the mainstream tells us to expect in these situations, but we can talk it out. There's going to be a natural sense of trepidation. There's going to be a natural adrenaline rush. There's going to be a natural moment of fight or flight that I think is probably independent of that media perception of what it is. I think just it being unknown is going to cause these natural reactions in us, which is going to make it a somewhat frightening experience. But I'm of the mindset of that only kind of heightens our awareness of the moment and the situation, and actually can make us better investigators if we channel that properly.
Yeah, you know, I think so too. And what's interesting, like, you look on at people who are channelers, like Leonora Piper, for instance. Like, when she described how it felt to have these personalities kind of run through her, a lot of them describe missing time, where they're just they meditate, they let their emotions rise and get to a place of joy, and they describe either things slowly going black, or they describe, you know, either, you know, hearing a voice, depending on whether they're clairvoyant or clairaudient or whatever. But you know, the people who are, I think, are meditating and go into these channeling experiences describe it as something that's very, very peaceful, where I think if you're getting sort of this rough and tumble experience and whatnot, I don't know. I think it might be indicative of the emotional state you're in at the time, maybe.
Yeah, but I also say, you know, to those, because it became a catchphrase when, you know, the paranormal television shows came out, that, you know, you can't show fear on an investigation. And there's truth to that if somebody's calling you in because they're afraid and they're asking you to help them out and make them feel better about what's going on. Yes, you have a responsibility then to come in and act professional and not allow the fear to kind of come through, because you're there to be, you know, the emotional support for somebody else. But when you're in any other circumstance, you know, if fear comes about, don't let it rule you and don't let it ruin the moment, but certainly, lean into a little bit and let that help you kind of heighten your awareness of the moment. There's a reason why we feel fear. It has a purpose, and that purpose can be applied to investigating.
I completely agree. And what's great too about fear is that, I think it depends, and this takes a little bit of practice and awareness and discernment, but I think there's such a difference between learned fear and instinctual fear, where with learned fear, it's kind of the story you're telling yourself about what's going on, and that story might be either right, wrong, or good, bad, or ugly. But then you've got the instinctual fear, and that instinctual fear is exactly like what you're saying. It's ingrained for a reason. And I think so many people brush off that instinct. They think, oh, no, it's silly, or I won't pay attention to it, and how many people do we know of or hear about in the news, or, people that have, or that we know personally who have been attacked or something like that. And usually one of the first things they tell you is, I knew something was off. Something didn't feel right. Something was off, and I ignored it. And women are really bad for this, because we're taught that, if we follow through on that we're being rude, or we're being silly, we're too emotional, and things like that. But like you're saying, that's put there for guidance, and as long as you can sit there and be aware and be the observer of the fear rather than being sucked into the fear, it can be such a useful tool.
And let's say that you are dealing with a spirit that is, a disembodied human soul, and still has some of that intelligence of a human being. If you're afraid, I think it will probably naturally want to not have you be afraid, and it will change the way that it interacts with you. And I also think if you try to be overly, for lack of a better term, macho about it, then you're going to then probably piss it off, because who wants what ghost wants somebody standing there saying, "Come at me, ghost"? Like, that's just annoying too.
Oh, exactly. And, and I think you've hit the nail on the head with that, where, they really don't want us to be afraid. That's really not the goal. They seek this communication. And from my experience and through the both researchers and whatever that have dealt with this for so long, especially places like the Winbridge Institute, who deals with mediumship all the time, that's one thing that they have always said right from the beginning, is that this consciousness is there for guidance. It's there it's an all access for us. And they really want that communication, and it's kind of a celebration when it happens. It's a really great thing for us to be interconnected. I think we're supposed to be. This is supposed to be a joyous experience, and I think when it's when it's not, or when we're projecting something that is we're terrified of it or whatever, I definitely don't think that's the intention of these people.
And I also want to see more acceptance of the process that everybody else has to go through to feel comfortable with this, that we shouldn't be, again, it's important to not let it interfere with what's going on, but you also have to be understanding of the fact that not everybody's going to walk into an investigation in the same emotional state that you are, and you have to let them process what is happening, because the worst thing you can do is bring them into an investigation and have them feel like it's something that they never want to take part in again.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's such a key factor, that we have to be really understanding that not everybody is going to perceive this the same way, but that it's supposed to be something that we're to connect with and it's supposed to be joyful. The process of even investigating, the adventure, the joy of being curious and exploring something new, or exploring a new theory or concept, or a new aspect of our consciousness, for that matter. It's supposed to be a joyful thing, and we're supposed to want to expand. I think that we've really been hammered over the last number of years, and probably the last 20, 30 years, that this is something that we're not supposed to talk about, and it's taboo, and it's evil, and it's negative, and if you get involved, then it's going to hurt you, and it's just not the case. When you get out there, it's so expansive. And I mean, it's not to say that there's not some scary stuff out there. Of course there's some scary stuff out there. But as a whole, I think even as investigators, we have the duty and the opportunity to present this in a way that we can say, look, we can approach the unknown with curiosity rather than fear. And if you can do that with the paranormal, you can do that with other things too.
Yeah, there's probably some changes that have to be made overall in everything that we do in investigating if we're going to start taking more of this into a account. That, you know, it's almost like if you are you know, right now we look at it like you're a plumber, or that was a bad analogy because of taps, but you know, but you're somebody coming in like an electrician, an exterminator, somebody who's coming in to perform some kind of a service. And if you looked at it more as if you were coming into the house as a psychologist, as a therapist, as somebody who is coming in there to make that one-on-one personal connection, it would change a lot of the way that we do things, and I think would change not only the responses that we get, but the results of the people that are dealing with it after we leave.
Oh, absolutely. And it changes the state of being the person you're dealing with, because it becomes less about them being out of control and putting them back in the driver's seat of their life. And I think that's the one thing that's really missing with a lot of paranormal research, because we're so taught to believe that this is something that is out of our control. We can't see it, we can't touch it, we can't control it. It's just randomly happening. We don't understand why it's happening. And it's a really powerless position to be in, and it feeds itself. So it's like you have a person who's experienced something terrifying, or something that they perceive as terrifying that they don't understand, and then they goose it up by, you know, calling their friends, and they're frightened, and they go to bed thinking about it, and they wake up thinking about it. And because of that, it has to show up in their experience again. So it happens again, something else happens, and then they're back at the beginning. So it just becomes this really, really vicious cycle where they just feel completely out of control. And, you know, by looking at it this way, it begins to put that person back in the driver's seat. Not to say that everybody wants to be in the driver's seat. You know, you get these people who are like, you know, I don't want to take responsibility for what's going on with me or my emotions, because you always get those people. But, you know, for the most part, the people that are looking for a sense of like grounding, something to hang on to that they can touch. Well, it's like, you know, we do have a say over this, and sometimes it's a slow process, but you know, I think that empowerment and giving that back to the people that are experiencing it is just so crucial.
Yeah, and we need to also talk about, you know, the way that we process things emotionally as investigators, and we need to have that conversation. You know, like paranormal groups love to meet up after they've gone on investigations and talk about the data that they collected, or the term evidence gets used. You know, they love to talk about all the experiences that they had on the investigation. I don't know how many of them asked the question in those follow-up meetings of, so how did it make you feel? What were you going through in that moment? How did that play on your mind later on when you tried to go to bed? Unless somebody feels like the problem was worth bringing up enough, like that part of it isn't talked about. And I wonder if there isn't some folks that are suffering some damage as a result of that you know, they're getting all of these eye-opening moments that are happening, but there's nobody there to help them process it.
Yeah, and I think that debriefing is really, really important. In South America, over the last about 10 years or so, they've come a bit further along, where they've started to implement counseling programs for people who have had experiences, and it's becoming more integrated into their psychology programs and whatnot. And they have I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but they've got a specific program there where you can go and talk to a counselor who really understands this stuff and isn't going to call you crazy. And so they've come a little bit further with it than I think the West has. But, you know, when it's important for people to be validated. And that's one of the things I think that can be missing in a lot of these instances where, you know, people aren't necessarily getting the validation they need. And that not being heard can do more damage than somebody turning around and saying, oh, you're a liar. You know, but that indifference or that not being heard can be absolutely brutal.
There's probably going to be, I would think, and it's sad to say, some long-term effect from some of this for some of these folks that we won't see for a while out. because they're so wrapped up in the moment of getting to the next investigation, getting the next case to work on, finding, in some cases, some of them are, and we can explore this when we come back from this upcoming break too, but so many people are doing this because they have a desire to be famous. That there's all of these different mitigating factors that make it so that you're probably not really processing what it is that you're going through. And, 5 years from now, when you've retired from doing this for whatever reason, you might have some sort of emotional breakdown.
Yeah, and intention is everything. Like you were just saying, intention is everything. And, everybody kind of has a different way of doing this stuff and approaching it and whatever. And I realized relatively early on that what I really loved, apart from going out and experiencing this stuff, which I do love, but is the education side of it, and to sit in the academic seat and be able to make this stuff accessible for people in a way that they don't have to sit down and read a pile of white papers. I like to try to make this as fun and as engaging as I can, so that people can get their head around it and learn about it. From a different perspective. And I know for me, right even early on when Stephanie was still alive, the two of us we made a pact that we said, we will continue to do Entity Seeker and continue that these programs as long as our friendship and our bond remained intact. And as soon as that day came that it was going to affect our friendship and our bond, that was the day that we would quit. And it never did. And she ended up, I need to say passing away, but it was, it was interesting.
Well, let's take our final break of the night, then we'll return. Stay tuned. There'll be more Midnight Society coming up in just a few moments here on Midnight Society on Midnight FM.
You're listening to Midnight Society with Tim Weisberg on Midnight FM.
And welcome back to Midnight Society here on Midnight FM, our final segment of tonight's edition with our guest Morgan Knudsen. But before we get into the final segment, just a reminder of what's coming up on the program. Of course, we're off tomorrow night. It is bowling night. And speaking of being off, I hope I'm not off on my scores again. And then on Wednesday night, we'll be back with our friend Dr. Irina Scott to talk about Beyond Pascagoula. She's going to take an in-depth look into the infamous Pascagoula UFO abduction, revealing new first-hand eyewitnesses and her research into a huge sonic boom heard on the very same night halfway across the USA. How are they tied in? How are they related? Dr. Irina Scott will join us on Wednesday to talk about all of that. And then, if you're a member of Midnight FM and you have access to our archives, go back and listen. Maybe tomorrow night you can have a little listening segment for yourself to go back and listen to our interview with Calvin Parker about the Pascagoula case as a primer for what we'll be discussing Wednesday. But we'll cover some of the basics if you don't get a chance to do that, or if you haven't heard it before. And then on Thursday, again, we'll have the night off because I have to get up early Friday. But Friday night, first of all, just a real quick notice for everybody. I will be speaking for the Tewksbury Public Library on Friday evening, talking about the legends and lore of the Bridgewater Triangle via Zoom, and I'll have some details about that as the week goes on for you to try to join in with that. But then Friday night here on the program, we're going to be joined by Jim Perry. That's right, the Jim Perry, the man behind the Euphemet podcast, is going to be joining us to talk about the mysterious world of the unknown. So we're going to be talking about all kinds of things that will be strange and unusual, everything from, having his aura read to visiting the Stanley Hotel to, we'll even talk a little bit about Indrid Cold. So I think it's going to be a very weird night, and I mean that in the best possible way, with Jim Perry of Euphemet on Friday. So even though we've got a shortened week with less programs for you, man, are we packing these programs with lots of great discussion, including tonight's show, as we've been discussing the idea of the paranormal not being something physical, but being non-physical, being emotional, being something that we have a more direct connection with than we understand. And Morgan, there's neurological proof that this is happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to me, that's one of the most fascinating parts of this is the work that's being done on the neuroscience level, where, people like Dr. Alexandra Moira Almeida in South America, you've got Dr. Morris Friedman here in Canada and Toronto University. You've got all of these people and some of the most brilliant minds in science right now who are bringing this neuroscience component to the forefront and demonstrating the fact that no, this is not something that's just in our heads. This is not something that is a mental illness. This isn't some disruption of the brain. This isn't. This is something that's happening. This is something that is connected. It's something that is happens to nearly everybody. There are more people that have paranormal experiences that do not, despite the way it's portrayed. And I think these people are just doing incredible work out there right now.
And there's also, I think there's going to be a shift in the way that we perceive the other people that are involved in the investigations. The way that not necessarily just the people in our own investigations, but people who have gone to the same places and gone through it, because we always jokingly kind of say we leave a little piece of ourselves behind at every investigation, but we're going to start to, looking through it through this lens, you'll see more and more of that, because if you're going to go through with this, type of a connection to the quote unquote haunting, how can you not leave a bit of your own signature behind?
Well, and even to take that more literally, they're beginning to understand now that we leave actual literal bits of ourselves, memory cells, behind in every interaction that we have. So every time we pick up an object, every time we're in a space and we sit down in a room where we have a long-term interaction with something, that actually is leaving memory cells behind. And that's what they're beginning to understand, is what is allowing for things like psychometry, for allowing for things like mediumship and stuff like that, is that some people are really, really good at picking up on these memory cells. And so I literally, we are leaving pieces of ourselves behind in these spaces, and they can be understood, they can be read, they can be perceived, in different ways. So, I mean, this is where this is going. I think it will change how everybody does everything in this field.
But that also means that it solves some of the question that comes up with, okay, so if a ghost is something that the people that are there investigating it create, then why does that ghost stay the same from person to person and group to group that comes through? I think what you're saying is a big part of that that we could be leaving that piece of it behind, the piece of ourselves that we gave to it behind, and that's allowing it to kind of continue with that same narrative.
Well, yeah, I think when we get into stuff like, residual energy, where it's just something, an image or a smell or something like that is just on repeat, like a needle on a phonograph, I think, it starts to explain things like residual energy, where, people can't necessarily get the apparition's attention. It's not conscious. It's just it's an image that's repeating itself over and over. And I think we're getting really, really close to understanding exactly what's going on there. and then coupled with, things like the electromagnetics in the environment and how it's getting recorded and things like that. But I think we're getting closer to answers than what people realize that we actually have. I think a lot of the time it's given, I guess it's given a story like, we have no idea what this is, and we don't understand this. But, in reality, we are getting really close to figuring out what's going on, even on a cellular level, as to how we're interacting with the environment and what we're leaving behind every single time, whether it be thought forms or whether it be through our touch, whatever it is, we have everything to do with the environments we survive in.
Would this mean then that we could keep from having to encounter and deal with things like demons? For lack of a better term, we'll just use the term demon that people use, and not necessarily all the baggage associated with it. But, these dark forces, these dark entities that we encounter, wouldn't that mean then that we could just make those stop existing by stop giving them belief and power?
Yeah. This is the crux for me of so much of this, and why this is so powerful is that, we were talking a little bit before about the observer effect and the idea that here you've got these, the observation of something is what is making it true. And a belief is just a thought that we keep thinking. So if we shift the belief and we shift our observation to something else, which can be really hard to do if you've already have had something manifest. It can be really hard to get your attention from that and think a different thought about it. But it really is the crux of everything. Once that observation is taken off of what that is, and you get your emotions out of that frequency, you really do start to reshape your reality. And that was the basis for my program, Teaching the Living, was that our focus and our attention is so much more powerful than what we actually give it credit for. It is ultimately creating our environment and what is upcoming in our environment and what probability we're going to experience. So ultimately, if we experience a negative consciousness, whatever the heck those things are, not people, it's whatever they are, the idea is that they are maybe a thought form or something that's manifested again through focus, like the Philip experiment, something through negative emotion. Once you can get your attention into another emotional state, then all of a sudden that activity starts to disappear. And it's not about going out and chasing and attacking something that you can't see. It's just about gently shifting your focus until you can create something new.
Yeah, but then if you look at it, you have to kind of peel that also back to the people that think that they're going through this before they call in anybody to come in and investigate. That means that they're giving it power. They're giving it that name. They're causing this issue for themselves. And wouldn't that just make it so much easier for the investigator to come in a case like that and say, stop believing in it? Just stop believing in it, and you won't have these issues anymore. Because instead, what we have people that go through, literal hell trying to help these families remove this entity from their lives.
Oh yeah, and I mean, and the more you push against something, the worse it gets. It's what you resist persists, as Carl Jung said. And, the more you push against, the more momentum that you give it. We live in a very inclusive universe. There's nothing that is excluded from the universe. Everything is attention and what we put our attention on. And so as soon as you're trying to exclude something from your reality, immediately your attention is on it. So if your attention's on it, then you're building more momentum within whatever that thing is. So the more you fight, the worse it gets. So ultimately, what it is being able to do two things. It's get your attention from it, and which is, as I say, really hard when something's already manifested. And really, it's not about saying, I don't want to pay attention to this. It's more about saying, I'm going to instead pay attention to this over here and replace it. And then getting yourself into the best emotional state that you possibly can. Because that's the other piece, is that your emotional state really will tune you into what you're going to get next. But and it's easy to turn around and say, oh, just stop believing in this thing. But I mean, it's like turning around and saying, well, just stop believing that chair's in the room. Well, it's hard. Like once that thing is in the room, it's really hard to get your attention from it. So it takes some work, and some people find it easier than others.
Yeah, I don't know that it would be hard, I think, for a lot of families to because I think that, and this is kind of the sad undercurrent of what goes on for a lot of this, is they like to take their own family dysfunction and blame it on the paranormal aspects of it. And now if you go in there and you say, well, if you just don't give it power, it'll go away, and then you don't have to deal with that anymore, they're going to have to turn inward. And now you're getting into a situation that no paranormal investigator should have involved themselves in unless they have, unless they're trained in that kind of psychology.
Yeah, I mean, we're the compass, we're not the solution. And that, I think that's the way it should be with any investigator going in, because ultimately we cannot change their behavior, what they're going to do. It really is up to the people. And like you say, you get these people that these, or a family or a business culture or whatever it is, that they have gotten it in their head that this has become their identity. And they are wrapped up in this identity, whether it be dysfunction, whether it be, being the victim, whether it be upset, whatever they've got going on. And it really comes down to what their level of readiness is. You've got basically 4 stages of readiness, and the 4th being, I literally can't look at myself in the mirror one more day because I can't stand this. I have to change it. And where, like, at the very base level of readiness, it's like, okay, authorities told me I should, or, oh, well, okay, somebody else told me I should change, so we'll do this. And until you get to that point where you're going, I literally cannot stand this one more minute of one more day, and I'm going to do something about it, they're really not gonna shift. And you can bring in, these people that will, do a ceremony or, do whatever. And as long as that is something that you're going to turn into a lasting change, that's fine. But don't expect that to be it, because what'll happen is that those people will come in and, they'll do a prayer ceremony or something will go on, and then they'll leave. And you might have a week or 2 weeks, of feeling pretty good. But eventually, unless you're making that internal change, you're going to slip right back into those old emotional habits, and you're going to be right back at square one. And that's why a lot of these people say, everything was great for like 2 months and then it all came back. Well, yeah, because you didn't fix the core issue.
Yeah, there's got to be, if we're going to really go down the path of looking into emotion as being the solution for this, it's going to start to become less and less of something that the average weekend warrior ghost hunter can go out there and handle.
Absolutely. And, it's got to be a team effort. It's got to be a community effort. It's, you got to have the resources and the people that can say, like, hey, there's a program here, or there's this here or that there. And I mean, really all our job is to turn around and say, look, like, here's from our perspective, here's where things can be shifted and changed and whatnot. And they've really got to figure out, what is going to be best for them, because everybody's different. When I was teaching this in the social work programs, it was always interesting to me, because the students all came in with this assumption as to how they were going to fix the people that they were given as clients. So they always had this, well, if I make them do X, Y, Z, that makes me happy. So therefore, that's going to fix them and it's going to make them happy. And they had these grandiose ideas as to what was going to work. And I always had to bust their bubble a little bit, because I said, look, every single client that you get is going to have a different emotional set point. They're going to have a different belief system. They're going to have a different culture. It's all over the board. And it's about meeting them where they are, and then getting them to a place that's going to make them happy, and that's going to look different for everybody. So, and that always kind of busted their bubble a little bit, because they always had this idea that it's like, well, if I just convert them into this person, then that's going to be fine. And it's like, no, it's not how it works.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, just to go back on what I said a little bit, I guess you could still have the average person be a paranormal investigator, but you would need to have somebody on your team that has, that type of training and licensing to be able to offer those kind of things. And then you have to let that person take the lead in that regard. The leader can't be the person who, bought all the equipment or founded the group or paid for all the black matching t-shirts to be made. Like, it's going to have to be a matter of like, let's take a step back and look at what it is that we're really doing here. And let's make sure that the person that's the best suited to handle that is the person that's taking the lead.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is about partnering with people rather than trying to fix the person, because it really is their own individual journey, and we're there as, support and whatnot, as I say, which is why I really, once I really understood what was going on, I really decided to take the sort of the education role and to be able to at least point this pathology out to people and say, look, like, this is what I can show you. This is what I can tell you about how this stuff works. And what's interesting is, even when I'm doing a live show or I'm doing classes or, whatever I happen to be doing, what's interesting is that the people that are in the class, they start to sort it out for themselves. Like, you'll start to see the wheels turn, and then they'll put their hand up and be like, I think this is what happened to me, and this is starting to make sense. Like, what happened to me as a kid now makes sense. And they start to work it out. And so I think a lot of people, once they hear it and once they understand it, it starts to click a little bit. And of course, hindsight's 20/20. You always you see it later, but I think it starts to click a little bit, and then they start to realize, oh my God, okay, I might not be able to change what has happened, but I can at least do what I can do from this moment on now. What can I change now to make my next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years even better, and whatnot. So yeah, I like I like to at least be able to sort of put the light bulb on and then watch people, create their own evolution.
Oh, I wasn't even thinking about the fact that it's going to require you to have to re-examine your own experiences before you can help somebody go through that. So you're going to have to, as you were saying, kind of question everything that you've gone through, and you're going to have to go back all the way to your own, whatever it is that got you to be into it.
Yeah, and I mean, you don't necessarily have to like root through it and do a psychoanalysis of the whole thing or anything like that. But you sort of go back and you start to think like, oh, wait a minute, that's why that happened to me. Oh, I remember how I was feeling at that time. That's what that was. And then once you can start to piece that together and go, hey, wait a minute, I was really depressed during this time period, and then I had event XYZ happen. You can start to see the correlation a little bit, and sometimes it's those past incidents that can be the most enlightening, because you start to realize, hey, wait a minute, there's something that I can actually put this into context with.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that we do need to have a re-examination after we've gone through, years of investigating and years of experiencing, go back and look at some of those initial experiences that got us into it. I mean, I've done it with some of the stuff that happened to me in my childhood to say, like, was it really, old hag syndrome that I was experiencing, or was it just shadows on the wall? I don't know. Like, if I was me and I was able to go back and stand there and be the me of now, investigating that case, what would I think, and what would I be looking for? And I think you have to kind of be willing to put yourself through those motions, to not only to make peace to what happened with you, but also to kind of better understand what it was that started you off, and why you started it off under the mindset that you did.
Oh yeah, and I mean, I can definitely look back too. And I mean, some of my experiences they've been some of the best learning experiences ever. Especially the ones that weren't so good. You can look back and you go, oh my God, like this is how this happened. This is where it came from. And yeah, I mean, not only does it bring awareness as to the paranormal side of what's happened, but it brings more awareness as to where your own head was. Like you can take a look at that and go, okay, am I bringing traits from that forward into my present experience? What is it? What is the quality of my present experience versus what was going on there? What can I change? And that awareness and that self-examination, I think if you can do that often, you can have a pretty amazing experience here.
And I also think that would probably help you have a better relationship with the spirits that you're encountering going forward.
Absolutely. And like I was saying before, this stuff is supposed to be connected and fun and amazing. And it changes how we look at death. When somebody passes away, I look at it a lot differently now than I would have, say, 20 years ago. You begin to connect with the universe, a conscious universe, in a way that is so amazing and so empowering, because you realize that you're not alone in this experience. And not only are you not alone, that you are the co-creator of something that is really incredible and ever unfolding. So it really opens up a lot of doors. When somebody says, "Oh, that can't happen," or "Oh, you're being silly, don't do that thing," that's never going to happen for you. You could say, "Well, that might be your belief and your experience, but that's not true for me." And you can take an entirely different approach to your world going forward.
Yeah, and if you start to put all of these pieces together and step back and look at the bigger picture, if you don't get hung up in all the little idiosyncrasies we have about quote unquote ghost hunting, and you start to look at it, you realize that you're looking at something that is so profound, and that we are looking, unfortunately, a vast majority of the people that are looking at it are kind of looking at one portion of it. It's almost like, they're too busy, dissecting the cold open to SNL that they haven't even watched the whole rest of the show.
Yeah. And I think it's a problem for a couple of reasons, because you've got people that are so intertwined with just this one avenue of investigating that they miss not only, I think, the bigger picture, but they miss the opportunity of a new understanding of what they're investigating. Because when you can get your head around some of this stuff, and then you go into a place that is reputed to be haunted or reputed to have some sort of activity, boy, do you look at it a whole lot different, and your results are going to really change. They really change. How you process those results is going to change. So for me, especially when you realize, the observer effect, if you're observing something that you're bound to get essentially either what you're expecting, or you're going to influence the results of said experiment, you're even going to conduct your experiments a lot different. So to me, it's a life-changing process for investigators, for sure.
No, absolutely. All right, in just the final moments that we have, can you tell us a little bit about your book, Teaching the Living from Heartbreak to Happiness in a Haunted Home?
Yeah, the book I wrote because of exactly conversations like this, is people that wanted to know what they could do. They wanted to understand the program in a more solid way, and that's what the book was designed for. It's essentially exactly what we've discussed, but more at length. It's an easy read, and I tried to condense as much as I could so that people could get to the point of all of this as quickly as possible. And it really is a guidebook as to, what to do, whether you want an experience, or you have an experience that you don't understand, or you've got something going on now that is bothering you and you don't understand what's happening, or you just simply want a better connection with non-physical. This will help that. And that's how the book was really designed and written. And I could probably add another 10 chapters now because it was written a few years ago. But it's a good shortening.
10 chapters just seems like it's a natural sequel. Just write a whole separate book. Yeah. And then give us just all the details again on Supernatural Circumstances, the new podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. So everybody can listen to it. October 25th is going to be the debut episode. We're going to be talking about the Philip experiments and the psychology behind it. And it's going to be available on podcast platforms everywhere, iTunes, Spotify. You're going to have a hard time not finding it. It's going to be everywhere. And it's with my co-host, the amazing Mike Brown of the Dark Poutine True Crime series. And he's got a brand new book coming out as well. So tune in to Supernatural Circumstances. Follow us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter, and hopefully it will live up to its reputation.
And that's a great dynamic to have, because I think there's a lot of true crime podcasts that will talk about the paranormal, a lot of paranormal podcasts that will talk about the true crime, but not enough times do they have people that are kind of experts in both sides of it that can bring all of that knowledge to every discussion.
Totally. And we're going to be pulling out the stops on some really deep, in-depth discussions on this stuff, and just bringing some new awareness, I think, to how people are viewing cases that they may have heard about, but also phenomenon that is going to be brand new to them, that's going to really blow their minds. We're going to be tackling some pretty crazy cases, and I think they're going to enjoy it.
Well, thank you so much. I definitely enjoyed this discussion. We'll have to do it again where we can go even more in depth with some of this, but I love the fact that, you're looking outside, to use a cliche, outside the box, but kind of outside these basic definitions that we've wrapped ourselves in for the last couple thousand years, and we're starting to really kind of look at the forest for the trees here.
Well, thank you, and thank you for having me on, because this has been wonderful, and it's great to be able to talk about it with someone who's so has such a great understanding of it.
Now, but the next time I have an emotional breakdown, you're going to be the first person I call, so be ready to deal with that. All right. Thank you so much. Have a great night.
You too.
That is Morgan Knudsen. Go and check out midnight.fm. Everything is linked up right there for you. We make it nice and easy. It never goes away. It stays there in the membership archives so that you can always access it and get all of that information. Because I know, when October 25th comes around, you're going to say, wait, what was the name of the podcast that I'm looking for? And then you'll be able to find it right there on the list. That will do it for tonight's show. Again, off tomorrow. I'm hoping to have a better bowling night than I've had the last couple of weeks. I know I keep saying this, but I'm hoping somebody out there is like a bowling instructor and will send me a private message and say, hey, Tim, I can give you some tips. But I did okay last week. I had pulled my groin the week before, and I was still feeling it last week when I went out, and I bowled 2 of my best frames yet. But then the middle one was like, why did I even bother showing up? So I'm hoping that I can get a little bit consistency. That's the most consistent thing I am when it comes to bowling, is being inconsistent. But that's all right. It's all about fun. It's all about getting to hang out with my brother and his friends. So that will be tomorrow night. And then on Wednesday, we'll be back with Dr. Irina Scott talking about Beyond Pascagoula. You think you know everything about Calvin Parker and the Pascagoula UFO abduction? Well, Dr. Scott will be with us on Wednesday to say, hold on a minute, because she has new information, new witnesses, and new connections to talk about with us. We'll do that on Wednesday. Until then, as Warren Zevon said, enjoy every sandwich.